1962, October 14th to 28th. The world nearly came to an end. The world fell silent as it waited, waited, and waited. The tension was rising between America and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But the tension rose to a peak when the CIA trained armed wing of the Democratic Revolutionary Front, an opposing Cuban political party, in order to overthrow the communist government of Fidel Castro, the dictator of Cuba back then. The plan was reported to the newly elected president, John F. Kennedy, who was opposing in the Cold War. The battle raged on for 3 days. 1,400 armed soldiers fought for their values, but the plan was a failure. Most were either killed or captured. Angered by the military offense of the United States to destroy an established regime, Cuba accused the United States for taking an imperialistic stance. It also legitimized the Russians to actively intervene and support Cuba against possible offenses of the United States. Russians sympathized with the Cubans that resembled their own revolution, the Bolsheviks' revolution. This is Fidel Castro. Fearing another United States military offense, he embraces himself under the protection of Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union. Khrushchev promises to deploy a military base in Cuba for defensive purposes. In fact, it was a missile launch pad for an atomic bomb that could easily reach Washington, D.C., the heart of the United States. The US government did catch signs of such military development. To persuade the public and the other branches of government for a military counterattack, they needed a hard-standing proof. Therefore, a U-2 spy plane was sent over the skies to take pictures of the missile launch pads, and they found it.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
The immediate response was to quarantine Cuba to prevent the missile from settling down in Cuba. American ships such as the destroyer and aircraft carriers accompanied by aircrafts controlled the seas. Kennedy, at the end of the meeting, said, "Well, Admiral, it looks as though this is up to the Navy." George Anderson, the Chief of Naval Operations, replied, "Mr. President, the Navy will not let you down." Now, even though there was a quick and effective response from the US government, it could not stop the American people from panicking. People started to buy tons of supply to prepare for situations that can happen due to the tension rising. The panic consumption clearly displayed the fear of the American society. Now, why couldn't this tension stop? I mean, no one wants a nuclear war, right? The reason is because no one really could back out. This would only mean defeat and weakness in the midst of the Cold War. Therefore, it was a prisoner dilemma. Nobody could actually hesitate in this situation, but no one could at the same time raise their hand for the peace to settle down. The quarantine continued. There were several times in which other ships that did not contain military weapons passed through. They were inspected by the US Navy, but was let through into Cuba. The ship that contained the nuclear missile didn't come. Congress and the government came up with several backup plans, such as full invasion of Cuba when the quarantine failed. But suddenly,
Premier Khrushchev has sent a message to President Kennedy today. The Soviet government has ordered the dismantling of weapons in Cuba, as well as their crating and return to the Soviet Union.
all was over so quickly. There was a secret telegraph sent from Moscow to settle the crisis once and for all. The missile bases in Turkey was to be secretly taken out. In return, Cuba was not to be attacked. Fidel Castro was to continue his regime. Also, to prevent any such tension to threaten the entire world's security once again, a hotline was established directly between Moscow and Washington. Now, all was over. we were free from the nuclear warfare.